Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys about something that has come up a few times in my comments when I've discussed things like game changers. And I've had people say, look, you can't say that vegan athletes at the top being absurdly rare and the odd exception is evidence that vegan diets are inferior for athletes. And here's my point. I believe that we can. I believe that we can't, because they are not proportionately represented in top level sports. And that is why vegans have to make such a deal when they find three really strong vegans somewhere in the world who are, by the way, still not number one in their sports by any stretch of the imagination. They're all really strong. There are actually three vegans out there who are definitely stronger than me, who I know of. Right? They're pretty well documented, but they're still not the best. And the point is that they are so statistically rare that they have to make a big deal about them. And in the grand scheme of things, if they were not vegans, no one would know they existed. No one would be talking about them at all. Because they're all strong, but they're not like world record level strength in anything. None of them are at the top echelons. They really aren't. Do your own research on that. Go look it up. I'm not saying they aren't strong. They're not at the top. And they're so rare that they have to highlight them. And if the fact that they're vegan is the only thing that really singles out the fact that anyone will talk about them. Okay, there's like three of them. So here's the point we come over to with this in sports in general. When you have vegans claiming that their diets are healthier, okay, that should by default produce better athletes, because if you're healthier, you recover better in general. Right? If you are healthier, you recover better in general. The fact of the matter is vegans are not more healthy than the general population as a general rule in the countries where they reside. And they're generally health conscious people. Most vegans are more health conscious than average, yet they are not more healthy as a demographic. So let's come over to the point with sports. If, as a lot of these people try to claim, that vegan diets are somehow superior for sports and athletes in any way, then they would represent the upper echelons, and here's why. Anything that singles you out and makes you better is disproportionate in elite level sports. I'll give you a perfect example. Let's take some elite sports. How about the NFL? Right, in America, the NFL and the NBA represent pretty high pinnacles of elite sports. Right? Less than 1% of the best athletes. Both of those sports, the worst players in those sports still represent easily the top 1% of athletic ability in America. There are traits that are disproportionate in those sports compared to the general population. There are genetic traits and physical traits. All right? And we don't even need to get into any sort of discussions of ethnicity, because it's actually not relevant for the point I'm going to make, because people will try to jump in as soon as we say this. That actually isn't relevant to this point, because the gene that we're going to talk about does exist in every ethnic group. It may not be evenly spread through them, but it exists in all of them. Hence, you have more than one type of person in these sports. So what do we see when we start looking at pro field sports in America? Actually, you start going to the scholarship university level. We don't even have to go to the pros. You disproportionately see fast twitch muscle fibers when you look at genes. You look at muscle fiber distribution. Okay? That's why good strength and conditioning coaches, when they're scouting athletes for scholarships, they test their vertical jump. You know the vertical jump is 90% genetic? You'll say, what? The true vertical test, and I'm not talking about any other test. Some people will try to compare something else. I don't care what other goofy-ass test you come up with that's similar. It is irrelevant. So I don't want to hear it. The vertical jump test, your vertical leap, how many inches your vertical leap is when measured correctly, the way that we measure a vertical leap, is 90% genetic. Not how you trained, not what you've done, not what your lifestyle is. It tells us a lot about your muscle fiber distribution and the amount of fast twitch upper threshold muscle fibers you have as far as the way they're distributed in your body. That test is a trait to see how good you're possibly going to be in terms of athletic potential, right? We didn't say ability, we said potential, because potential has to be actualized, okay? It's going to tell them everything. And you know what? Guys with really, really high vertical jumps are the norm in all of those sports. They all have a gene set that exists in approximately 1 to 2% of the population. Almost every person, the overwhelming majority of people in all of those sports at the professional level, all have this trait. The majority have it. It's a trait that exists in a tiny, tiny minority of the population. And it's not like it's a massive difference. It just gives you a small edge in performance. But you need to understand a 5% advantage in performance is literally the difference between winning a gold medal in the Olympics and not placing. A 5% difference in performance could literally be the difference between you not getting further than the college level in a sport and getting a $30 million contract. That's how big of a difference a small advantage gives. And in this case, nothing more than muscle fiber distribution that will impact athletic potential. It'll help you jump a little higher. It'll help you sprint a little faster initially. Right? You pick up speed quicker. Big advantage. And it's really a minor thing, but it sure matters in a competitive environment. So let's come over to the vegan diet. They might say, well, only a certain percentage of people follow it. And we don't need to get into vegetarian because vegetarians don't have a disadvantage. Vegans do. Okay. If it was better, they would be disproportionately represented. Right? Vegans would be at elite levels in sports, would represent 10 times their percentage of the population. So if you had something, let's say vegans represented 1% of the population, if they had any actual sports advantage from their diet, which if it improved health and recovery and reduced tendon inflammation, that would be a very clear advantage. That 1% would actually be at least 10% or 20% of elite sports. They would be disproportionately represented. They aren't. They're almost non-existent. Fact. The data shows that animal products, particularly dairy, have very large benefits for sports and athletes in general, for building muscle, for recovery, for hydration, endurance, everything. The data is pretty solid on it. Therefore, technically, people who don't consume these products are at a potential disadvantage. Vegans are not proportionately represented in sports, not just because they're a small part of the population, but because they have something that gives them a small disadvantage and therefore they can't compete at the elite levels. They're underrepresented. And if they're underrepresented, then it is a disadvantage. And it's not a debate that they are disadvantaged. The data is very clear. Like, I'll tell you honestly, if you have the physical ability to drink milk and you do not drink milk and you are trying to be the strongest, fastest, or most jacked athlete you possibly can be, you are at a small disadvantage purely by not consuming milk. Okay, the data on milk is pretty phenomenal. For athletic purposes, it's actually quite a phenomenal food. One of the best foods you could possibly consume. So if you're avoiding it, you're at a disadvantage compared to people who are drinking a bunch of it. All other factors are equal. They have a slight advantage on you. Okay, so veganism just in general puts you at a disadvantage. And no, if it gave you an advantage, including even health, which would again impact recovery, if you were just healthier and fitter, which it doesn't make you, you probably would perform better as an athlete. And they would be overrepresented. They aren't, they're underrepresented. They are so rare that they have to be highlighted when they exist. Okay, because they're an anomaly. They're an exception. And ironically, based on the data that we have, if every one of those vegans who are performing at a pretty decently high level in most of their sports, if they started consuming dairy and animal products, they would probably bring their performance up a notch. They would actually perform better than they are. That's if we go by what the actual data says. They're technically shortchanging their potential by doing so. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.